Final Fantasy IV, known as 2 on the Super Nintendo, is a masterpiece of a game where the story goes from the Middle Ages to the Space Age in a matter of hours. I say a matter of hours because that's all it takes for speedrunners to absolutely destroy this game. Today, we're going to dive into a glitch that breaks the game in such a huge way that even Squaresoft made an excuse to try to make it canon in the story. To start out, there are some things we need to clarify. There are many versions of Final Fantasy IV out there, but the only ones that fall under the criteria for this video are the Super Nintendo and Super Famicom versions of the game. Unfortunately, we won't be talking about any of the other versions today. With that out of the way, let's take a look at the story. While the game is massive in scope and has the players going through many different parts of the world, the goal ends up being similar to many early Final Fantasy games. Collect the crystals, have your best friend betray you, twice actually, and save the world from the evil moon wizard Zeromus. To understand why this glitch is so important and so broken, we need to dive into the any % No 64 category first. As you may have guessed, No 64 means that No 64 door glitch is used in this run. Taking a quick look at the Ross World Record, we'll be using a handy little chart to show off the route. While no speedrunning knowledge is needed, this chart does insinuate that you have played through the story and beaten the game at some point. Starting from Baron, runners go through Mist, Kaipo, and Watery Pass to Dampian. From there, they go to Antlion Cave, backtrack to Kaipo, and then push forward to Mount Hobbs and Fabul. After Fabul, runners end up in Mysidia and go through Mount Ordeals to fight Mylon Z and to make Cecil a paladin. Soon after, from Mysidia, they teleport back to Baron and fight Bygan and Kenazo. Getting the airship from Baron, runners head to Tororia and go through Cave Magnus for the crystal there. After the crystal is obtained, they go into the Tower of Zot and go through a sequence of events to fight Vivalis. Heading to Agart, runners enter the underworld into the Dwarven Palace for a couple of boss fights and use a trick to get the crystal there. Entering the Tower of Babel and dealing with a few more boss fights, runners go through there and head back to Baron Castle for an airship upgrade. Heading to Eblan through the cave, they go back through the Tower of Babel to fight Rubicante. They then return to the Dwarven Castle to wake up Cid, head to the Sealed Cave to lose Cain, and go to Mysidia to grab the Lunar Whale. After going to the moon and recruiting Fu Soya, runners go back to the Earth and into the Giant of Babel. In the Giant of Babel, runners make their way to the 4 elemental fiends and CPU bosses and defeat them. Then they head to the moon and fight the silly man himself, beating the game. The Ross record is a 3-hour, 2-minute, and 31-second run, which is an incredibly strong time for the category. But why did we need to know this, and what does it have to do with the 64 door glitch? Well, it just so happens that this glitch cuts out an entire third of the game. Respectively, this glitch is used in a few different categories: any % no credits warp, any % Super Nintendo, and any % Super Famicom. So we're a few minutes in, and the question needs to be asked: what exactly is this glitch? Let's jump all the way back to 1992. Squaresoft had a series of newsletters called the Agapogo Examiner, which answered questions about their titles sent in by fans, and had small columns with bits of information about the games themselves. In one issue, they referred to the 64 door glitch as Zeromus's 8 squared Curse of Extinction trap, and for players to beware traveling between certain floors too many times, as it could crash their game or even erase save files. Perhaps the company gave this warning as they knew how broken this glitch could be, but unfortunately for them, that wouldn't keep curious minds away. Fast forward 20 years later, a Japanese speedrunner by the name of Cheap looked into different ways to break Final Fantasy IV and found out there is a hierarchy counter that changes whenever you enter rooms. This counter starts at 0 in the overworld and increases to 1 whenever you enter a town, dungeon, and some other places. These are also used by the warp spell, which decreases the counter by 1, and the exit spell, which warps you to floor 0 to place you in a location. There are also rooms that increase this counter by 1 and decrease this counter by 1. These are called go rooms and return rooms, respective to how they affect the hierarchy. Going into a little more detail, when you leave a go room, the game records your current map ID, coordinates, and direction in association with your current hierarchy counter. Then it increases the counter by 1. When you leave a return room, the counter decreases by 1, and you move to the place that was saved for the previous counter value. It is actually speculated that developers use this method to make it easier on the game to set a movement event in general. For those familiar with concepts in speedrunning like this, you may see where I'm going here. There are certain rooms that mistakenly only increase the counter when you take a specific exit, and this counter can be increased by a huge amount, up to 63. Okay, maybe 63 isn't a massive number, but if you try to increase it again, something weird happens. It goes back to 0. From what is understood, Final Fantasy IV doesn't have any dungeons with that many floors, so the developers would have never expected that number to go so high. So after increasing this counter, you're now back at a hierarchy counter of 0, in a place that's not the overworld. That kind of breaks the rules of how decreasing that counter works. So when you do something to decrease that counter by 1, like exiting a return room, then instead of going back to whatever floor 63 was, you go to floor -1. You could say that this is literally the minus world of Final Fantasy, but honestly it's much crazier than that. At a first glance, this looks to be your run-of-the-mill map glitch, with some maps looking plain and boring and others having absurd visual effects. However, most of these maps are actually generated based on values in the game's memory that we can control. While this sounds complicated, it's actually fairly simple when broken down. Each floor is generated using 3 separate criteria in the game's memory. Not just that, but these criteria are mostly different for each floor. Floor -9, for example, is based on the current XY coordinate for the Black Chocobo were left in the overworld, and how many times you got on the Black Chocobo during the session. Cheap not only found out the criteria for the floor generation, but he was also able to map out negative floors all the way down to -159 at the time. He not only documented all of this, but he also posted a video of the glitch in action on the Super Famicom version of the game back in 2012, beating the game in the process. Another user by the name of Deruber Owner also was one of the first documented to perform this glitch on the US version of the game, being shown in September of 2012. Believe it or not, this glitch can actually be started in several places in the game. The town of Baron is a great example of this, but unfortunately there's an issue with trying to glitch anywhere in the overworld. Remember the talk of the boring looking map earlier? The tan one? That map is a default map for the underworld, and not only does it let you progress through the glitched floors, you can also use warp in some of these maps if need be. For the regular overworld, default maps can't be walked out of, and warp doesn't work either. So what does this mean for the speedrun? Let's look at the route I showed earlier and give it a little trim. That's right, the run now jumps from Dwarven Castle all the way to Zeromus. In February 2013, a runner by the name of Brosentia did a run on the US version of the game, making this one of the first documented runs of the no credits warp category. He completed his run in 2 hours, 24 minutes, and 42 seconds, much faster than what the no 64 category could do at the time. Fast forwarding a little bit to February of 2014, and legendary speedrun TAS'er Pirohiko completed a task of the Japanese version using this glitch in 1 hour, 42 minutes, and 3 seconds. Continuing a bit further from there, multiple runners such as myself 086, Exodin, and a couple others were able to refine the route and menuing to improve the game even more, including a lucrative step route that allows runners to control what encounters they get in the game. This is another concept that we won't go into much in this video since the focus is the 64 door glitch, but I'll leave a link to some resources in the description. So how do runners do this exactly? To navigate the negative rooms safely and fight the final boss, some specific things had to be done by the runner on the way to the underground. Not just that, but runners also need to access specific rooms to get things they need to defeat the final boss. Mostly following the normal no 64 glitch route, let's highlight these points. Some of the small glitches I talk about here will be just an overview, and I won't go into great detail. To start out, runners need a specific amount of GP to get through floor -47, and the buying-selling route is specifically designed to keep that in mind, along with the GP received from required fights. Fleeing from fights can cause variance with this, but we'll cover how runners deal with that a little later. There are also 2 main routes involving the purchasing of items, the 9-item route and the 12-item route. In this example from Rivers McCown, we'll use the 9-item route. Using the duplication glitch to duplicate an underflow Kane's Iron Shield, as well as performing the misclip glitch to access mist from the right side starts us off. Runners sell a stack of 65,535 shields for a whopping 3,276,800 GP, and buy 10 dancing daggers from the shop. Skipping forward to Fabul, after getting a couple more characters in the party, runners duplicate Yang's Fire Claws to get a stack of 65,535 during the Fabul Gauntlet, then do some equipping and unequipping to bring the stack down to a total of 254. Going into the Mysidia shop, runners do a little more complicated shop menu that can vary from runner to runner. Rivers opts to do an altered route that buys 70 of Cure 2 and 70 of Life. Then he sells a 70 stack of Fire Claws twice, leaving him with 114 Fire Claws total. While these numbers seem extremely arbitrary, the exact counts involved in the routing are incredibly important to get through several rooms in the glitch later on. Fast forwarding to Baron, Rivers then shops to get 10 headbands, karates, and silvers, then gets 8 Thunderclaws, 58 Ice Claws, 68 Fire Claws, and 3 stacks of 13 Cure Rods. Also, after this purchase menu, Rivers equips one of the Ice Claws on Yang, giving him a stack of 57 Ice Claws. That will also be important for later. After all of these purchases, boss fights, and encounter runaways, Rivers ends up with 3,153,749 GP. While the number itself isn't designed to be exact, runners can use a special GP calculator to determine if it's safe to go through floor -47 or not. Other floor setups in the run include several things. Floor -7 is determined on how you park the hovercraft outside of Mount Hobbs. Floor -9 is mainly determined by the black chocobo's X coordinate. Floor -10 depends on how your last yellow chocobo left the screen when you hopped off of it. Floor -44 is depending on your window settings and battle settings, with the map being changed with the red and green settings, X coordinate placement with the green and blue settings, and the Y coordinate with the battle speed. Floor -45's map changes every frame you wait on the file select screen, with the first 50 frames being guaranteed safe. So runners have less than 1 second to mash through that screen on their last load. Floor -46 changes with every second of the in-game timer, and the maps cycle every 256 seconds. This floor is actually the most dangerous, as it has the highest chance of a hard lock. When going through this room at the wrong time, the game either won't let you navigate the room, or it'll freeze and make a sound that is akin to bacon sizzling on a stovetop. Runners can use an in-game timer calculator to determine if they're able to make safe passage through the room or not, similar to the GP calculator concept. Other rooms involve moving around Fusoya's magic and some other things. But wait, we don't get Fusoya before we go into the glitch, so how does that work? We'll leave that question unanswered for right now, but in order to get to that point, we need to talk about another trick that's used in the midst of this mind-boggling glitch. Remember the weird amount of items obtained throughout the game? Rivers had been reordering them in battles up until the point of the glitch, and these items are used for something called inventory warping. Basically, some tiles in the game are trigger tiles, and when stepped on, the game searches specific parts of the game's memory to decide what to do with that trigger. Usually, this is data that's already linked to the trigger, and whatever is supposed to happen, happens. However, if the trigger doesn't have any data defined in that part of the memory, it actually doesn't stop searching. It just keeps going endlessly until it finds something to use. When the game is looking for that data, it looks for 5 bytes in a specific pattern: trigger X, trigger Y, target map, target X, and target Y. So knowing what bytes we need, we can manipulate this directly in the easiest way possible, through our inventory. In regards to inventory slots, this is the exact same as the design I talked about in my Chrono Trigger video. The item itself takes up 1 byte, and the item amount takes up the other byte. Thus, one inventory slot consists of 2 bytes. Now you might be thinking, with these whole inventory slots, there's no way to make 5 bytes only happen, which is correct. But since the game is looking for a specific value to start the sequence, we can make the game ignore the first byte, and then check all the rest instead. While in the 64 door glitch in the US version, runners use the Mage Room as their warp setup. The Mage Room is first set up as floor -9 thanks to the Black Chocobo event I talked about earlier. The way this is set up actually allows the runner to use the Mage Room as their exit spell point. This will be important for a little bit later, but for right now, this is where the inventory warping concept comes into play. Back in the Golbez fight, Rivers ends up moving equipment in his inventory to set this up. He puts the items in clusters of 3 in slots next to each other. For example, Cure times 13, Fireclaw times 68, and Thunderclaw times 8 allow rivers to warp to the sealed cave since the map ID for the sealed cave entrance is 68, and the event tile was set up in that specific place in the mage room thanks to the specific items that he used. How does this end up being set up as our exit room though? Well, remember the ice claws that were bought? Those were organized also, and that weapon is associated with the mage room map ID. The event tiles in the mage room are considered to be +1 tiles. This means that going through the tile in floor -9 brings you to a floor 0 mage room, and then the sealed cave event tile brings the count to 1. Exiting from the sealed cave brings it back to 0 with going back to the mage room, and then back to -1 by going back into the glitch exit. So why do we need to go to the sealed cave in the first place? Well, thankfully our story is almost over and I can finally tie everything together. The sealed cave warp is required to make Cain leave your party, to later allow for Fusoya to join the party. This not only is how we can manipulate the later floors, but also set up for the final boss battle. Floor -44 ends up being the Lunarian Palace, where Rivers recruits Fusoya, who is the most important part of being in the game so quickly. Since all the characters in the party are such low level, and don't have the abilities to defeat Zeromus, we need someone who can pack a little more of a punch. After Rivers recruits the Puddle of Beard, he proceeds through the most dangerous rooms in the game, avoiding being turned into sizzling bacon, and changes his magic and items around to set up for the final rooms he'll venture through. Floors -59 through -66 are based on Fusoya's black magic positions, and floors -67 through -74 are based on his white magic positions. Going through this, Rivers ends up back in the Dwarven Castle, and here's where another fun glitch mechanic goes into play. When you're in a negative floor, and you proceed through a +1 door, you go back to floor 0, and some settings get corrupted based on your XY coordinates, and the direction you leave the room. This corruption allows Fusoya to get the spell Upco, the most powerful spell in the game for this run. Now that Rivers has everything he needs for the final boss, he uses exit to teleport back to the mage room he set as his exit point earlier, and uses one of the event tiles to warp into the Zeromus fight map, which so happens to be map 114, and is related to the 114 fire claws in Rivers' inventory. He broke the previous warp by moving his items around, and so the updated warp destination was now Zeromus' lair from the mage room tile. Besides the legendary engineer Sid taking Fusoya's place, things go as normal up until the start of the final fight. Fusoya casts Upco and instantly defeats Zeromus. It turns out that Upco doesn't do any damage to the enemy, but it flags that it's dead, so the battle just ends after that. At the time, this was the world record for the category with a time of 1 hour, 56 minutes, and 26 seconds on January 28th of 2017. Eventually, the 12 item route I mentioned earlier became more used, allowing for runners to teleport to the Lunarian Palace right after the sealed cave, instead of walking to it via specific in-game settings. This optimized route allowed the Roth to complete the run in just 1 hour, 54 minutes, and 50 seconds on January 16th, 2018. Now that we're done looking at the no credits warp category, what does the credits warp version of this glitch look like? Well, it's not quite as exciting as its more popular counterpart, as runners use the mage room to warp to the credits from room -9. Fast forward a few years, and not much has changed with either of the categories. A few runners have broken their way into the top 10 of the no credits warp category, but it has proven to be a massive challenge for those looking to defeat Zeromus. With the game pretty much solved, how much will it take for this game to be pushed further? Will runners choose to try and find other creative ways to quickly navigate this absurd glitch? Or will they choose to grind until one run lets them through? Stay hydrated, folks, and thanks for watching.